In cinema, the less you need to convey, the greater the work becomes. You don't need epic battles or 1,000 sets. Sometimes a single space is enough to trap the audience and leave them breathless. Within those four walls, everything is decided. Destiny, truth, madness. With the simplest of stories, the weight of an entire life can be transmitted with more force than any epic. Because films can take us to infinite worlds. But sometimes a single setting is all it takes to create a masterpiece. The Man from Earth proves that cinema doesn't need special effects or grandiose sets to blow your mind. The entire film unfolds inside a cabin, where a professor is saying goodbye to his colleagues. The premise seems minimal, even banal, until he makes a confession that challenges everything you believe about the history of humankind. There are no spectacular sequences, no action, only people talking. And yet the tension and fascination grow, minute by minute. This is pure cinema, capable of holding you with nothing but words and ideas. A true exercise in narrative minimalism that shows the most powerful thing of all is a dialogue that opens your mind and leaves you questioning everything long after the credits. A cult film that spread quietly by word of mouth until it became a legend of independent cinema. Its magnetism is not in the visuals, but in the idea. A story that forces the audience to reconsider time, memory, and the human condition itself. A film minimal in appearance, but immense in what it leaves echoing inside. There are films that are like duels, but fought with words. Sleuth, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, is perhaps the greatest psychological chess game ever filmed. The story begins with a mystery novelist inviting his wife's young lover to his lavish country mansion. What seems like a simple romantic confrontation quickly turns into a twisted game of wit, manipulation, and deception, where you never know who truly has control. The entire film takes place in a single setting. That mansion, which becomes less a space than a chessboard filled with traps, masks, and secrets. The most astonishing thing is that almost all the action rests on just two actors, Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine, locked in a battle of performances as magnetic as it is incredible. Every look, every calculated silence, every line dripping with irony and venom keeps the viewer hooked as though they too are playing the game. Sleuth proves that you don't need explosions or chases. All it takes is two brilliant minds and a perfect script to create a hypnotic, claustrophobic, and dazzling experience that remains unsurpassed in the realm of psychological thrillers. With his very first film, Tarantino made it clear he was the absolute master of dialogue. Reservoir Dogs begins with a heist that we never see. What matters is not the action, but what happens after. A group of criminals trapped in an empty warehouse, bleeding, distrusting, and tearing each other apart while trying to discover who betrayed them. The brilliance lies in the way Tarantino refuses to tell it in order. His non-linear structure constantly throws us back and forth between past and present, revealing little by little who each man really is and what secrets he hides. This fragmented editing turns the confinement into a puzzle of escalating tension, where each time jump adds another layer of paranoia. The warehouse becomes a psychological battlefield where trust shatters and violence explodes without warning. What could have been a budgetary limitation became a virtue. With razor-sharp dialogue, unforgettable characters, and storytelling that plays with time itself, Reservoir Dogs redefined independent cinema and proved that one single set is enough to create a myth. The Lighthouse is a plunge into madness in its purest state. A modern masterpiece of horror. Robert Eggers locks Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson on a storm-battered island with nothing but a lighthouse for company, creating one of the most intense acting duels of the century. The story is simple. Two men tasked with tending the light. But what begins as routine becomes a descent into the darkest corners of the human soul. Shot in grainy black and white, in a square format that tightens the frame as if trapping the viewer too, The Lighthouse is not just a setting. It's a prison, a monster, a presence that dominates every shot. Between rum, secrets, superstitions, and hallucinations, the boundaries between reality and delusion collapse. Dafoe and Pattinson deliver magnetic performances, a duel that borders on myth. There is no external epic here, only the internal. The battle against the other and against oneself. With a single location, Eggers builds an oppressive, nightmarish universe where the sea roars like a constant threat. The lighthouse proves that one space can hold infinite horrors, and that sometimes staring too long into the light is enough to drive you insane. Tarantino took the concept of confinement to the extreme with The Hateful Eight. A group of strangers take refuge from a blizzard in a remote cabin in the Wyoming mountains. Outside, the cold is lethal. Inside, the tension is unbearable. The space is minimal, but every corner of that cabin becomes a battlefield. You don't know who to trust. Every glance is suspicious. Every word hides a secret. Tarantino transforms the confinement into a bloody poker game, where violence is always about to erupt. The use of Ennio Morricone's music, the deliberate pacing, and the long, venomous dialogues make the atmosphere suffocating, as though the audience were trapped there too. And when the tension finally breaks, it does so with the director's trademark brutality, raising the climax to unforgettable levels. With a single set, Tarantino composes his most theatrical, most claustrophobic, and perhaps his cruelest film. A story of hatred and betrayal that proves that sometimes the real hell is not outside, but locked in with us. Amour, by Michael Haneke, takes place almost entirely within a Parisian apartment. There, an elderly couple deeply in love face the inevitable. She suffers a stroke and begins a relentless decline. There are no twists, no artifices, no music, scarcely even cuts. Only Haneke's unflinching gaze, observing with surgical coldness as life fades within four walls. The camera never looks away, offering no respite, no escape. The viewer is trapped in that home just like the characters, forced to feel the weight of helplessness and isolation. Isabelle Huppert appears as a distant echo, but the real center is the brutally human bond between Jean-Louis Trintignant and Emanuela Riva, in performances that transcend any artifice. Amour does not seek easy tears, but forces you to confront the most real horror of all, the fragility of the body and the certainty of death. With one single set, Haneke crafts a devastating film, without adornment or hope, that turns the everyday into a silent nightmare. A portrait so honest it becomes unbearable. Because the end of life is not beautiful. Luis Buñuel took the concept of confinement into territory as disturbing as it is enigmatic. In The Exterminating Angel, a group of Mexico's high society gather at a mansion after the opera. Everything seems normal until the inexplicable is revealed. They cannot leave the room. No one is holding them. There are no invisible walls or chains. They simply cannot cross the door. That small, absurd detail becomes a collective nightmare. As days pass, the masks of elegance and politeness collapse. Refinement turns grotesque. Civility turns primal. Buñuel transforms a single setting into a devastating metaphor about the fragility of social norms and the thin line separating culture from barbarism. The camera watches with cruelty and black humor as these characters fall into the most absurd degradation, revealing that the most powerful prison is not physical, but mental. The Exterminating Angel remains one of cinema's most unsettling and original experiences, because sometimes all it takes is closing a door to expose the true nature of humanity. Rope is, in a sense, Hitchcock's Funny Games, a cruel experiment where tension brews in an elegant living room. The premise is chilling. Two young men murder a classmate and hide the body in a chest just before hosting a dinner party. The entire film is set in a single upscale New York apartment, unfolding in real time. The revolutionary aspect is Hitchcock's decision to film it as though it were a single continuous shot, hiding cuts to maintain the illusion. In total, 10 long takes, a historic feat for its time. This makes the viewer feel like another guest, trapped in the room, fully aware of the deadly secret at the heart of the gathering. Every camera movement, every repositioning becomes a choreographed dance designed to heighten suspense. The casual dinner conversations take on double meanings. The air thickens with every toast, every joke, every suspicious glance. Hitchcock's genius lies in shifting the suspense away from whether there will be a crime to whether the crime will be discovered. Rope is not just a claustrophobic, hypnotic thriller. It's an eternal lesson in how cinema can manipulate time, space, and the audience's very breath using only a single set. The greatest suspense in history arises from something as simple as an open window. James Stewart plays a photographer confined to his apartment after breaking his leg. From his wheelchair, he watches the lives of his neighbors, quarrels, routines, love affairs, until he begins to suspect he has witnessed a murder. The fascination lies in the fact that the camera never leaves the apartment. The viewer sees exactly what the protagonist sees, trapped in the same space, condemned to watch and imagine. That confinement becomes a laboratory of suspense, where every gesture across the courtyard carries immense weight. Hitchcock transforms curiosity into voyeurism and voyeurism into danger. The tension builds not through chases or explosions, but through glances through a lens, silences that last too long, the doubt of whether what we think we see is real or a product of obsession. Rear Window is much more than a thriller. It is a reflection on cinema itself, on the act of watching and the impossibility of remaining neutral when what we observe consumes us.
Okay, that's 11 guilty. Was Bonnie not guilty? 1.
One single setting, 12 men, and a decision that will decide the fate of a young man accused of murder. Sidney Lumet made his debut with 12 Angry Men and created one of the most powerful films of all time. Everything takes place inside a jury room, stifling and increasingly suffocating. The premise is simple. 11 of them believe the accused is guilty almost automatically, but one, played masterfully by Henry Fonda, refuses to condemn without first examining the evidence. What begins as a routine procedure becomes a moral confrontation, where prejudice, fear, and resentment erupt into the open. Lumet turns the room into a microcosm of society. There is racism, indifference, arrogance, but also compassion and justice. The camera moves closer and closer to the faces, the framing tightens, the air seems to vanish. There is no action, no effects, no multiple sets. Only words, glances, and gestures sharp as knives. 12 Angry Men proves that true suspense is not in violence, but in the battle for truth. An eternal reminder that sometimes the fate of a life rests on the brave voice of a single person. But within those four walls, more than a verdict is decided. One of the greatest peaks of cinema is written. If you enjoyed this ranking, leave a like and tell me in the comments. Do you think the fewer resources cinema needs to convey something, the greater the work? And if you'd like to keep the conversation going, follow me on Instagram. See you in the next video.